In this video, we have 4 tips to help you continue to move forward on your creativity projects. We're going to talk about things that we learned through the creativity challenge and ways that we've learned to stay motivated, as well as share some works in progress. Cheri has her embroidery projects. Hey Sugar Snaps, welcome to the Textile Indie YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Brittany.
And I'm Cheri, or Mom.
If you're an old friend, welcome back, glad to have you. If you watched our Embroidery WIPs video from, I think it was in November, I'll link it in the description below.
Depending on how you count, I have 43.
What?
43! And it's partially your fault, and it's partially the fault of a sloth. So an update on what I've actually finished. Big surprise, it was less than I expected, but that's probably the story for most of us. However, I did get a lot done, and since doing creative projects is not my go-to way to spend my free time, I'm actually, in the end, pretty proud of myself for how much I did accomplish. So, let's see. Looking back over the list, I finished the necklace pendants, which we did a video on for the Vlogmas challenge. I completed my very large nativity scene, which is packed away with the Christmas stuff. That was extremely gratifying. It turned out beautiful, and I'm very, very pleased with that one. I completed this tiny bike ornament piece that I still need to frame. And I learned from the embroidery pieces and the bike, I was scared actually, because they were both very fine pieces that used one strand of thread. And I assumed that because they were finer that was going to equal harder and outside of my skill level. And it turned out that actually embroidering with one thread is easier in a lot of ways. Yeah, there's a lot less room for error. So if you put one strand of embroidery floss in like the wrong spot in the weave, it doesn't show up as a glaring mistake like it is when you have a 6th strand of thread and you kind of...
Oh, because it's bulkier.
Yeah, it just really sticks out if you're in something that's lined up. Phoebe, Sasha, get your claws out of my... I can't tell the difference between Phoebe and Sasha. I never have been able to, so I just call them both Phoebe, Sasha.
This is Sasha.
Sorry, Sasha. I do keep my kids mostly... Okay, that's a lie. I get their names mistaked all the time, too. Okay, I finished my... What do you call this? I finished the sampler. This was really fun. I had a lot of fun with this one. It took quite a while.
It looks very fun, very bright, and it's of different texture.
Yeah, Brittany and I got together on Super Bowl, and instead of watching the Super Bowl, we sat up in my little reading nook and we both did some stitching. That was really fun. I got a large part of that done during the Super Bowl. Let's see, I'll come back to that. I'm almost done with my grandkids' play area hippo. It's almost there. I mean,
so cute.
It's like an hour away from being done. Let's get back to that this week. And then I mentioned in the other video that one way I was cycling through all of my projects was to master a stitch and then just do that stitch on all of my projects or several of the projects at once. And so the stitch I've mastered is the back stitch. I have almost every one of my projects back stitched. As an example here, I have it completely outlined, and I just am now doing all of the satin stitching. So I did go through, and I have probably a dozen to 15 projects that are outlined like this and just sitting waiting for me to learn more advanced stitches. So in the process of doing that though, just really focusing on one stitch, I did get quite good at back stitching, and now they're much more even, and I have a lot more confidence in the stitch. And because that's kind of the foundation for all embroidery, it was a good one to get a handle on.
It sounds like you have a lot more projects that you've made progress on, maybe just not in the realm that you would show them.
Which is the definition of my personality in every area of my life. I usually have 30 books going, 20 writing projects, a dozen work projects. That's just kind of how I operate, so perfectly normal. I did, however, gain a lot of wisdom, and I learned a lot from doing the January challenge.
Back in January, we did a develop a daily creative practice challenge, and you can see the playlist linked in the description below, where we did a 30-day, it ended up being 32 days, challenge. Each day had a different ebook chapter that we had put together, and I did a video twice a week to kind of read through the ebook and talk about some of the topics and ideas that we were thinking about. And through that process, we both, Cheri did embroidery and I did a variety of different things, and you can see those in those videos. But we learned some things in doing that process, and from some of you that shared your experiences. So we wanted to talk about 4 things or 4 takeaways that we each, well, so I guess 8 takeaways that we learned through the challenge.
So I participated in the January challenge, as many of you did. I also was the one reading your emails, which really kept me motivated and was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for commenting in the videos and sending those in. That was just wonderful to read. So one thing I learned, number one, a challenge like this is the wisdom in itself. For 2 reasons. 1, it gives you accountability, and 2, it gives you permission. So in the realm of permission, a lot of most of the things we do aren't really pragmatic. They're not like making dinner or cleaning the house.
Life and death.
Yes. And so sometimes it can feel like, oh, we're wasting time, or that we have other things to do that are a higher priority. So by saying, oh, I'm doing this challenge, I have permission to sit down and do this creative project that I want to make progress on. That was huge. And so every day I at least put in 15 minutes. And most of the time, most days, when I sat down to do my 15 minutes, I ended up spending much, much longer on the project once I got going. So that was a good part of it. The other part was the accountability of just knowing that even virtually that I was doing something with a group of people and I wanted to hold up my end of the bargain was huge, because maybe I was just going to go out to bed to read and I thought, oh, I'm going to do my 15 minutes of embroidery. And so knowing that you were all out there doing this along with us, it was really motivating to have me do this on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And that accountability transferred over when I found myself for 8 days in a different situation with different constraints. I didn't have my embroidery with me, but I thought, well, what other creative thing could I make progress on? And I have a Cricut that has been sitting in the box for an embarrassingly long amount of time. And I know Cricut's not fiber art, but I have been wanting to make progress in figuring out how to use this thing so that I didn't have to look up a video every time I wanted to print a simple decal. So I just spent that 8 days focusing in on learning to be able to use it on paper and vinyl in a simple way without having to look at the directions. So over and over every night, I spent 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever I had, and I actually made progress. I can actually get the Cricut out now, set it up, and make something without having to look up a YouTube video on how to set it up. So that was huge. And it was because of the accountability that I wanted to be doing something in the creative realm every day along with all of you. So I will highly recommend that you try some kind of 30-day challenge, either with a virtual community or with some of your real life friends.
So from my experience, I wasn't working on one thing in each day's 15 minutes, especially because 2 times a week I was working my creativity time while doing a video for the January challenge. So in order to make it interesting, I was trying to throw in a different project each day. And I happened to have a zillion different projects in the works, and so it wasn't very hard to find a different project to work on. But what that brought to me was just a space to, okay, there's the accountability. I'm doing this video. I'm leading this challenge. I'm going to sit down. Like Cheri was saying, there was that accountability factor that was permission to sit down and do it. But also, for me at the time, was very much more of like a meditation sort of situation, because I wasn't making progress on just one thing. So I wasn't seeing a consistent forward motion on just one project. But that 15 minutes was time to just sit down and kind of tap into flow state, which I'm actually going to do a video on in a couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. But flow state being this place where you get into a creative rhythm. It doesn't have to be creative. It can be physical or being outdoors or whatever, but just kind of tapping into a mind space where you're very, very focused on something specific for an extended period of time. And for me, that was 15 minutes to an hour, a half hour, depending on how into it I got. But just having that time was very valuable. Not seeing consistent progress in something, but just having the time and the space to rest in something that I enjoyed doing.
Maybe that's the wisdom. You need to lead a 30-day challenge, at least with a group of friends. That's where the real accountability comes in.
It's true. I want to break in really quick in our conversation and mention that we have something called a VIP printable library, where on textileindy.com we have a collection of free printables that will support your fiber and traditional craft endeavors. We have a goal setting workbook that guides you through setting goals, coming up with ideas. It has work pages that you can sketch your projects out, take notes, keep track of where you're at. We also have a crochet and a knitting log page. So if you're working on a lot of different knitting or crochet projects, you can print it out and it'll help you keep track of your project, note down the yarn type that you're using, what stitches you use, any kind of notes that you want to take on your projects. We'll put the link in the description below. You'll get an email to verify and it will have a password in that email. So be sure to check your email once you sign up. Use that password to log into that VIP library. Now back to our conversation.
The second thing I learned, and I think this is no surprise to anyone, is that you need to make a space and a place for your projects. If you can literally leave them out, which I ended up doing with the embroidery because it doesn't take up much space. If you can leave them out, that goes a long way in making progress. It's near the kitchen where I leave it out. So I could run over and just take a few quick stitches while I was waiting for the coffee to heat up or waiting for dinner to finish. I got a lot of little bits and pieces done in that time. Also, just having it out reminded me, because I forget, oh yeah, I have a project or 50 going. I should probably work on that a little bit. This fell down for me in about the middle of February. I still was going strong and working almost every day, well into February, and then the grandkids came, and needles and small children don't go together, so I put everything away. And after they left, it was probably 10 days or so before I went, oh, that's right, I have 50 projects going. And I got it all back out again and I got back into the rhythm. And it just reminded me again of that it really is pretty foundational. And I know not everyone has enough space to do this. So depending on what type of craft, fortunately embroidery is a very compact craft. And I've shared these before, but I have these little zipper pouches and each one has a different project in it. And I try to keep, I have a few pairs of scissors, needles. I try to keep everything for that project in here so I can take it with me. I can pull it out. I've already thought through my colors and I have all of my embroidery floss, and you know, that translates to any project. If you're sewing, if you can leave your sewing machine out on a table, you're much more likely to sew than if you have to pull everything out of the closet every single time. Yeah. So it just kind of goes without saying, but it just came back to me of how very important that is.
Yeah. I mentioned that I started a Monday afternoon garment project where I'm trying to sew something as a garment every Monday afternoon and set aside that time in my studio day. And I found that to be very true, that if I can leave the sewing machine and the serger set up, even if I have to pull out the ironing board because it takes up more space, if the sewing machine is set up, there's that one step less friction to sitting down, and we'll talk about frictions here in a minute, but it just made it a little bit easier to get into sewing and break through that barrier of starting. So another one is having my spinning wheel in the living room rather than just having one set up in the studio, because when I'm in my studio space, spinning is not the thing that I typically sit down to do, but it's a great activity to do when you're chatting with friends in the living room, or you're watching a TV show, or you know, whatever situation it is, you're passing the living room and you think, I've got 5 minutes. I could sit down and spin for 5 minutes. So just kind of catching those few seconds, few minutes here and there really starts to expand your creativity time.
Which I think is one of the benefits of being multi-craft. You have different things going because maybe you're a weaver and your loom takes up half of your attic. Well, you're obviously not going to leave that out in the middle of your living room. Maybe you do. Great for you. So I think having different crafts. I am having a lot of, now that I'm over 50, my eyes are a real bugaboo for me. And I have to wear glasses to see far away. Anyway, if you're over 50, you know what I'm talking about. So here I am doing my embroidery and also watching TV. That does not work because I have to take my glasses off to see close up, and then I can't see the TV. So I know your answer is going to be knitting, but I really need a project where I don't have to look at it so that I can be looking far away, and doing the project at the same time.
Yeah. Knitting or basketry, but both you have to get over the hurdle of learning, right?
Right.
So.
The third one, wisdom for me, is to have multiple projects going at once. But I will say, know thyself. And we know from your comments and emails that some of you thrive when you just have one thing that you're working on and you finish it before starting something else. Some of you, like us, prefer to have multiple projects going on. What I will say about this is that you should ignore the rules. Productivity experts will tell you that you should start something and finish it and put all of your energy into it before moving on to something else, that it's a waste of time to dabble over here and over here and over here. I say posh, because if I only have one thing to do, I end up doing nothing. If I have 10 things to do, I get far, far more accomplished, even if I'm not finishing projects or it's taking me a longer period of time to finish projects. And this is supposed to be fun. So you get to do it however you enjoy it, and don't worry about the rules.
Yeah. I think it's much different in the crafting realms, or, you know, what we're doing here, fiber arts related things, because, I mean, productivity experts are working in the workspace. And in productivity, where making progress on something in a short period of time is really valuable, where we're doing slow craft and it can go as slow as you want it to. And that is the joy and the benefit of doing this as a hobby or a passion project that is good for your mental health. It's good for, you know, your brain. I saw an article about flow state, and I'm going to track this article down because I thought it was very fascinating, that was talking about the benefits of having different projects for different energy levels. So let's say you have a lot of creative energy on a certain day and you want to problem solve, you want to figure things out, learn something new, challenge yourself, and you can be all in, full on energy into something, some creative project. That's going to be a certain type of project, a certain challenge that you take on. Then let's say the next day you have barely any creative energy at all. You get home from work or whatever your day holds, and it's like, well, I've got 15 spare minutes to do my creativity practice, but I don't want to learn anything new. I don't want to take on the next challenge in my project. So you just pick up something that's maybe just knitting stockinette stitch, and it's just knit stitch over and over and over again, and it's very fluid, and the barrier to entry is very low. Having a variety of projects like that that fit your different energy statuses, I don't know. I really value that because my days they're very fluid and my energy levels fluctuate, and some days I feel like Superwoman and I can take on all the problems, and some days it's like, don't ask me a question, I have no bandwidth for this, I just want to sit, don't talk to me, I don't want to think, I just want to spin without thinking about anything else. So, you know, kind of managing your energy and your projects, and having, again, we're big fans of having multiple projects. We understand the idea and the concept of only having one. Well, we barely understand it.
I don't understand it.
But, you know, more power to you if you're a one project kind of person. Yeah. Anyways, that is my thinking of why I have multiple projects. And I brought out a couple of projects as examples. So this project bag, this is my going in the car. If my husband's driving, this is something that I can do while we're driving. It's a April cardigan. We went on a road trip a couple weekends ago, and I was able to knit on this basically the entire time, even in the dark, because it's just straight up basic stockinette stitch. And I got past the more challenging parts and was able to just knit on it. And then I have another project. This is my going for a knit walk project. So I have it in this little backpack so I can put it on my back, and I pull the yarn over my shoulder so it's back here like this, and I just knit along and I walk, and I get my afternoon walk in while I'm knitting on a project. This is a collar for a sweater. And then I have another project. I focused on knitting because it's very easy to see the definition. I have this project where there is a different chart for different sections of this top. And this is the back of a love letter top. Oops, I'm going to drop everything here. And there are a lot of different stitches involved. There's a lot of pattern here, and I keep messing it up because if I miss one little detail, it throws off the whole pattern. So this is one that's like, I need to focus, I need to sit down, do nothing else, don't have an audiobook playing because I need to think about it, and I'm still learning lace. So this is my more challenge heavy project. So having that kind of array of projects like Cheri and learning a different stitch versus doing a stitch she already knows. Right. There's a big difference in the output and what you're expecting of yourself.
The next tip is figuring out what your roadblock is. And once you figure out what your roadblock is, you can think of a solution. That solution, and I'll get to my roadblock in a minute, but that solution could be a gadget or a new piece of equipment. I invested, and it really wasn't a huge investment. This runs about $60, this Nerge embroidery piece. Let me show you how this works. So you can set it on a tabletop and you just put your piece in here. What I was struggling with is being able to do the stitches that really require two hands, or really a third hand. For instance, like the French knot and some of those where you need to hold the thread and do the stitch. There's an example of this in pretty much every fiber art. And then also, and most of the time I use it standing up. Kind of looks like the Wall-E from the children's cartoon. And this sits in front of my chair near the TV because I can watch YouTube videos without watching them. So that's usually what I do. And then I can sit here and you have both your hands. This is your third hand and it gives you a lot more control. It's much less awkward. Once I bought this, it made a huge difference in how much I was getting done and not resisting the process. I don't need it all the time. I don't travel with it, but this was huge. So do you need a better tool, a different tool, or some kind of gadget that would help you to get over your roadblock? Another solution is that you might just need to do some more deliberate practice, like Brittany with her lace knitting. And in my case, it was French knot. On the nativity scene, there were a couple hundred French knots and I was just not getting them. So I needed to back up, watch a couple of videos to get some tips on how to be successful with French knots, and then just do some practice on a scrap piece of fabric. And once I finish the nativity, I have the French knots down and it's one of my, what I call a mastered stitch now. I don't have to review how to make it. It's just in my muscle memory. But I had to step back, slow down, and actually just spend some time practicing that micro skill in order to move forward. Yep. The other thing you can do to get over a roadblock is to make sure that you're set up past your roadblock before you come back. So here's what I mean. For me, the biggest roadblock with embroidery is threading the needles because it's frustrating anyway, but also my eyes. So I found that if I make sure that I end every session threading up needles and getting ready, or in some cases when I was working on this one where I have 12 different colors, that's a lot of needle threading. So I ended up spending one whole session just threading every needle. Needles are cheap. Oftentimes gadgets and these kinds of things are the cheap part, so you can have extras. But I just threaded up all the colors and had them sitting in a folded up napkin next to my workstation so that when I sat down, I was completely ready to go. There was no friction. Really, it takes seconds, but it was just enough that if I walked over and it was like, yeah, I'm not going to sit down and work on that because I just didn't, it was silly. I didn't have the needle threaded. But I bet everybody has one of those roadblocks in every skill or craft that you do. Yeah. So figure out your roadblock, and before you walk away from your project, fix the roadblock so that when you come back, you can just sit down and get right back to it. Yeah. What are your roadblocks?
Yeah. I think each craft that I do has a different roadblock. Knitting, it's always weaving in the tails. Sewing, it's having the sewing machine set up, or really having bobbins full. So at the end of a sewing session, making sure that whatever I project to be working on the following week, that last 5 minutes of my sewing time, filling up some bobbins so that they're ready to go. I found that black and white and cream tend to be consistent thread colors for me, so I keep 2 to 3 bobbins of each of those colors in my bobbin stash, and I refill them whenever they're empty. So I always have 2 to 3 of each of those colors. And if I have a consistent color that I'm using, I do the same. Another strategy that I came up for knitting, for sewing in the tails, let's see if I can find it, is I have these little tool bags, and I have one for each of my projects, or not each of my projects because my project list has grown, but a few. And so I have 1 or 2 that go into my different projects. So I've gotten these, or actually Mom got these for me. These are finishing needles, and they're really nice because they have really wide eyes, but they catch your tails so you can thread in the tails, and they come in different sizes. So I've pulled together these yarn needles or finishing needles, and I have some of these in each of my little project bags, as well as my extra pair of needles, measuring tape, all the things that would be a hiccup or something that would cause me to get off the train of progress.
Yeah.
So that, you know, if I do have to add in new yarn, I can just finish off that yarn really quick because I have my yarn needle. If I have to go up to the studio and search around for my yarn needle from the last projects that I did and I didn't put it back where it was supposed to be, finding things is probably the biggest roadblock in my studio space.
Also, if you have to walk past your sink, your washing machine, or any other chore, it's hard to not get distracted and say, oh yeah, I needed to finish that. And then by the end of the afternoon, like, your time is gone. So being able to just stay in one place, I think is a huge part of the battle.
Yeah.
We would love to hear what kind of roadblocks you have, especially if they're unusual. I have an unusual one. As a quilter, I love cutting out quilts and I love hand tacking down the binding. I don't really like piecing that much. And I know that I'm pretty sure that's weird. I've talked to a lot of quilters and they're all like,
they'll do the quilt top and
yes,
then be done.
Like,
yeah.
You cut my quilt out and I will piece it. And I'm like, anytime. So I would love to hear, like, what is your roadblock, especially if it's kind of unusual and you think that it's different from, you know, what most people find as a roadblock.
If you need another video to keep you company while you work on your works in progress, check out this video here on the screen. And until next time, happy making. See you later. Bye.
Bye.